Welcome to Silence Kills. We'll be discussing scientific evidence for a creator and other controversial topics. Here's our hosts, Tom Taylor, Steve Bentley, and Sim Climie.
So let's talk about the second law of thermodynamics in this conservation and energy law. The second law is an extremely important law when we have to decide, is God involved in this or is he not? In what the second law in its most basic form is really two parts to it. One is everything tends towards chaos and disorder when left alone. And two, there's the heat death law, which basically says that if the universe was eternal, if it had always existed, that there would be no hot spots and cold spots in it today, that it would have already, heat death would have occurred. Everything would have been equal as far as temperature is concerned. And we don't see that, obviously, in our universe. We have tremendous cold spots and tremendous hot spots. So the second law is really working against the thought process that the universe has always existed.
Well, I guess as we're talking about this stuff and looking at the science thing on there, I was thinking about, we're not trying to use science to prove there is a God. What we're trying to show is that science demonstrates the reasonableness of a faith in God. And the reason we're looking at it is that everybody has faith in something.
Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest.
And you may have faith that the universe was self-birthing, that it did its own thing, or faith that the universe has always been a steady state, or you may have faith in whatever. And as we discover and understand more, we start to see like a faith in an eternal universe violates the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, that it's not possible based on what we understand of our universe today. A steady state universe isn't viable, so it's not reasonable to have that faith. You might have that faith anyway. You might choose to just believe whatever. But really, when we're talking about faith, we're talking about a reasonable faith. And Sam, you were saying something about faith earlier.
Well, I just had a thought.
I love it when that happens.
Christians or anybody, even an agnostic who believes in a creator or something created, it's not a delusional faith. It's not something that someone pulls out of the air and says, well, I believe in Santa Claus. No, it's a reasonable faith.
Commence primary ignition.
We have to use reason every day. I mean, everything that we do, there's reason behind it. It's not something we're pulling out of the air and go, oh, I believe in Santa Claus, and then use that kind of faith to govern our lives. This is reason that we have to use every day to govern our lives. And science, and just is, in my opinion, proves reasonable faith. In everything I do, like I go back to the law of gravity. I believe in the law of gravity, and then what happened if there wasn't, and I go off and I jump off the house and I float off I'd float off the face of the earth if the law of gravity didn't exist, but it's reasonable faith. We're not delusional.
Quiet.
We're not crazy.
So let's go a little bit deeper into this second law of thermodynamics. The other aspect that we talked about is that when things are left alone, they tend to break down. They tend to degrade. They do not organize themselves. But we're taught by the evolutionists that this Big Bang theory, somehow tremendous order came into play. But we don't see this in scientific law as the case of what we would expect. It violates it. That's what we're really talking about this.
Yeah, you look at the first law, and it's hard to really get your mind around that first law. It's so big. This second law is something we see in everyday life. I mean, just look at us. We're three old, fat men. We didn't start out this way. We used to be very good looking.
Yes.
But the law, that entropy, we see that in everyday life, that left to its own devices, it turns to chaos. If you got kids, you got animals, you'll see left to their own devices.
You got cars.
Everything starts falling apart, and you can observe this in our known life. And so then you have this conjecture and people putting a faith in a system that says that everything gets more orderly. Well, that completely violates the second law of thermodynamics, and it violates your very sense of reasoning when you look at everything. Nothing does.
Nothing does.
And I love looking at this, the second law of thermodynamics, because this is where in Genesis it said God created order out of chaos, and you look at that and it's like, wow, and it actually lines up again as a very reasonable ancient statement about how God created that. It says he pulled order out of chaos, and it's like that's really significant. It's a highly accurate scientific statement that everything is chaos and God brought order, and now everything left to its own devices starts to disintegrate back into its original state of chaos.
And what you're talking about there is that God did something with this chaos and created order. Now, what you're bringing into play here is a closed system versus an open system. Evolutionists would believe that we're in a closed system, that there's not, in other words, an outside force that is interjecting and organizing things for us, right? The system is closed. We would believe, no, God absolutely had a hand in it. He put order out of this chaos. He was directly influenced in it, and that's why we would expect to find the order that we do find.
Well, and that goes back to a faith statement again, too, is they're starting from a premise that it's a closed system.
Right.
You know, and we can, and this is where we have to watch out when we're discussing this, having a logical discussion about it, is, are we starting from the premise that it's an open system, or are we actually looking for the truth? Is this an open system that has an outside causer, or is this a closed system? Because they're just saying, no, it's a closed system. Right. They're not looking at the science that demonstrates, no, within this system, it's very clear that everything moves towards decay.
Right.
For there to be order, there had to have been something outside the system that's a causer, therefore it's an open system. And that's where you start using reason to go, that's why I believe that there is a God, a being, an outside causer. There's something more, and it's reasonable and makes sense.
Amen.
So that's a big thing on that faith thing. Sam, you got something that's just biting at you.
Yeah. We're not going to get into it in this segment, but I can see how an atheist or just an atheist could say, well, if he's the God of order, then it goes right into order and purpose and reason. Okay, then it goes into a moral discussion, which we will get into in the future. So just hang on, keep watching.
Anything else you want to add to the second law?
I don't think so. You got any other thoughts on that? I do love this when it's so self-evident. We see this in so many places in our daily living. We see this all the time.
We live it.
Mm-hmm.
We live it.
Right.
We observe it, which science really is knowledge, but observation is one of the most important things. That's how real science gets done. We observe the decay. We observe, if we bring in a hot cup of coffee, that it goes to room temperature eventually. This is entropy. This is the second law of thermodynamics in effect. We live it every day. We're not happy when our coffee turns cold, right? We like it that hot. So we do live entropy every day. We experience it every day. So that's why we say, how can this universe, first of all, come from nothing or create itself? And then how can it organize itself to the point it is now, tremendous organization? And then we can say this just all happened on its own. That is, to me, unreasonable to believe that.
I just wanted to, I think Steve was wanting me to share earlier what I'd shared before we started taping, is that God didn't create something out of nothing. The biblical definition of faith is faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So God used his faith. He created something out of his faith. He spoke things into existence. And faith has substance. It's something that the natural eye can't see. And so it's not like one day God's like, you know what, I'm just going to create something out of nothing. No. I mean, that's not even scientific. Just like when a woman makes a cake, she doesn't pull frosting and every ingredient's out of thin air. Oh, and it's there. No, it takes something to create something, and God used his faith to create everything.
Interesting.
Disrupt the darkness.